Hello, this is section 2 of our week 8 class, and I'm going to discuss into that a little further and give you some more tips and techniques you can use on your presentations. So first is a bit of a shortcut. There are quite a few shortcuts that occur with Shift, Control, Alt, and I just wanted to show you how they tend to work. So let me do the following. Let's say we have the right side of the screen here. We'd like to create a layout of some sort. Now, again, using rulers across the top of the screen, across the left side of the screen, you got these rulers here. And if you right-click on the intersection of the rulers where X and Y meet at the upper right-hand corner here, and you right-click on that, you can see the setup for inches. And you can also set it up for things like pixels and what have you, if you like, or simply hide the rulers altogether. But the rulers are very advantageous. This is 11 by 17 that I set up earlier, and I can click and hold on one of these rulers and pull out a guideline. And I can use this for alignment purposes, and I can, place it, excuse me, anywhere on the screen. But when I actually have them selected here, I can also change their locations here under the properties under transforms. And I can make it exact. So for example, if I didn't quite reach 8.5, and I wanted to be in the center, I would just simply type 8.5. And it slides over that guideline to the center. Now, depending on what you do, you can actually drag over guidelines on or off the page. So if you drag over a guideline on the page, then they'll terminate on the page and not out here in this area outside of the borders of the sheet. But if you drag out your lines outside, for example, if you really want to just measure and make sure that this is hitting the right mark, you can place your lines out here in space as well, and they'll just run off the page. There's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of preference of where you can place these objects. Also, sort of mathematical equations work inside of these transforms. So, for example, if I move this line over and I want it to be, let's say, the center of this plus another 1/8 of an inch, rather than trying to figure out what 1/8 of an inch plus 8.5 inches equals, I can simply grab this line here, and here under the X for the X and Y, but under the X, I can simply type 8.5 plus 0.125, for example, 1/8 of an inch, and enter. And that does the math. So the total becomes 8.625, for example. And you can do the same thing on the other side. You want to lay out a guideline exactly 1/8 of an inch to the left of this current center line. I can draw a line out here, place it higher randomly in space, and then simply do the opposite. I would say 8.5, because I'm working in inches, it understands inches. 8.5 minus 1/8 of an inch, which is 0.125. Enter, and then suddenly it gives me 1/8 of an inch on the other side. I guess another quick technique would be just simply draw a box, and you can set up the height and width of the box here. So for example, I can say, let's say I wanted a 1/4 inch space. Let's say 0.25. Excuse me. Grab this box here, for example, and here I can say for the width and the height, 0.25, and the height 0.25, and 0.25. I typed it wrong. And I can use these little areas, little symbols here as a shortcut to create spacings as well. We'll have a conversation about this in the future, but it's really important to set up alignments in your file, and having these guidelines here does a good job toward that goal. But if you have different shapes like this, and I come into here which says fill, and I fill it in with, for example, blue, then I can use this little box as a guide to help me determine where certain construction lines are supposed to be. So for example, I made it a 1/4 inch. Well, if I grab this object, it snaps to these lines that I drew. And if it's a 1/4 inch, I can have it snap to the center line right there. And then I can use that object, that simple square, for example, and line things up against the sides of it, for example, here and here, and they'll snap onto them. So here I can simply do a quick grid like that, for example. Or I can grab that little box and do Control-C and Control-V, Control-C for copy, Control-V for paste, and I can place it here, for example, and then use guidelines above and below to set up spacing. So I'm setting up a grid spacing to put pictures in here or put text in here. These are organizational tools. These are some of the shortcuts you can use to make that happen. Just simply by drafting a little sample rectangle that gives me space, clear space in between elements of my design, whether they be pictures or text or what have you. And then I can also keep these things off screen out there in space when I don't need them. So for example, maybe I needed that to simply denote, an 1/8 inch space, an 1/8 inch space, an 1/8 inch space. And I can use that again later to create some more spaces like this in my design. I can also click on these lines and hit delete. Actually, what's it delete? Actually, I click on the lines and hit delete to delete them. Just hit delete on your keyboard. And there's also some different things you can do with the actual shapes themselves. So for example, if I grab a placeholder and I want 3 images here on the right side of the screen, the left side to be text, right side to be 3 images, as an example. Well, I can make a box here, arbitrary size, and then I can copy it. I can copy this box the exact same size by simply clicking on it and holding Shift and Alt at the same time. And that's the move command and an align command at the same time. And when I move the box down here, it makes a copy, a duplicate, because maybe I'm supposed to put 2 pictures here, for example. Now, obviously, if I wanted to make sure these are an 1/8 inch apart, I can grab my little guide here and place it inside there, and then move this up to line it up against that edge here, and then move this back. And now I have a 1/8 inch gap there. I can grab another one of these, Shift Alt again, and then here you'll notice that I get a little tip here that the gaps are all going to be the same. For example, there's a little green line that shows up there. So when I hover here, that same spacing will be down here at the bottom, and I've got 3 equally sized boxes and 3 equally sized gaps, an 1/8 of an inch, an 1/8 of an inch between these 3 pictures. And then I can do some other things here. I can, for example, grow these proportionally, which we've done earlier with the photographs, but I can left click on the mouse, go through all the objects, line them up here at the top, I'll put them on the margin there. And then here, holding Shift, I can grow those boxes and have them grow proportionally so that the boxes get bigger at the same rate, at the same size as all three, but so does the gap. The gap grows at the same proportion. So whether that's twice the size or 1.5 times bigger, it'll all grow at the same rate. And if they're all still selected, I can also grab these little grips and pull them over to the edges here, and very quickly here, I can create an alignment like that. For example, alignments make your drawings look very organized, very neat. Now I can also use Control rather than Shift, but Control to grow these boxes. And what happens here is that they're growing, but the gaps in between the spaces remain exactly the same. So this gap remains exactly the same.
The starter chart is getting hard. You get numbness in the. You get a pain here. You get a pain.
So I can select those, hold, Control, pull them down, pull it over, and pull it over. And that should work as well. So look for these shortcuts, whether you use Shift, Control, or Alt when you're working. And when you want to preview your work, you can always just use W. And W gives you an idea what it might look like when you do it like a print preview, for example, where the guidelines don't show up. So none of these guidelines here, these rulers, objects that I'm creating, never show up. They're only available if and when you need to place objects in here, in these spaces, in these areas. I'm going to use Shift. Actually, I'm going to use Control. End it up there. And very quickly, I can grab objects and place them in here. So, for example, I go File, Place. Whoops, sorry. I can have that. I can go File, Place. And here, I'll replace selected item. This is currently selected here. I'll replace this box here with a graphic, which I can pick and choose from. And the same thing here. Place a graphic in each one of those. And again, the graphic is going to come out at full size based on its size in Photoshop. And then you can determine what to do about that size afterwards. So when I click on this image here and go to Window, Links, you can see here, for example, these three images here, the first, second, or third one, they're all called the same file. These are at they came in at 72 dots per inch. So 72, they came in at a pretty poor quality to begin with, and they're going to print at a poor quality here. So now you have an option here, what to do about this. Pretend that the actual PPI is the file in Photoshop, and the effective PPI is the file in InDesign. Do you want to fix the Photoshop file, then return the Photoshop and fix this file so it's not 72 dots per inch, it's something higher, let's say 200 to 300 dots per inch, and then bring it back in, or fix it in InDesign. Leave the file alone, but just know in InDesign that as I make this file smaller, it'll look better and better. And as soon as I reach the 200 threshold under effective PPI, it's going to look pretty decent when this is printed out. So you have options. You don't have to change the original file. You can simply do the work here in InDesign, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the end, you can see you can have access to each of those files independently. So on and so forth. When it comes to doing preliminary designs, it's also useful to use like stand-in text. So for example, if we're doing, here's text command we talked about last week. If I did a text box here, for example, then rather than typing, generic information, sometimes it's useful to take information off of a website like this text generator that creates Latin. So, for example, on this website here, for example, you can create paragraphs. Let's say you have some paragraphs you're going to place in here. You're not done typing up the paragraphs. You're not sure what to include in those paragraphs, but you know you're going to need 5 paragraphs, or 2 paragraphs, or what have you. Well, here in this Latin generator, you can simply make up paragraphs. Okay, I want 3 paragraphs to generate, and then here use copy. And it'll copy that text in Latin. And here in InDesign, you can basically just Control-V for paste the text into here. And there you have it. So the text doesn't have to be specific, but it's meant to be placeholders because you intend to replace the text eventually. But you need something to show temporarily until you're done doing that work. And this is a good way of doing it. You can then highlight the text and then doing a number of things. You can go back to type, change the font. You can also do the same work over here under properties because the font is located here and the size of the text is located there. So you can do 24 points. You can come into here. You can pick different fonts. As you scroll through here, you'll see what the fonts look like. For example, there's Century Gothic. And it'll be in Latin for the time being. And it's not important to know what the text means at this point, because they're meant to be a placeholder. And so you can very quickly do that and create, preliminary designs of these layouts before getting into specific designs that are unique to this project and this project only. So the Latin generator is a good website to use to do that type of thing. Okay, so the same websites used by different folks that make websites, for example. It's all kind of Latin design. When you do a website and you create all the different pages, but at the beginning of a job, you might not have all the text and information for those web pages, but they'll need to have some type of text. So you can simply copy and paste the Latin in there temporarily, and then come back and replace it later. Once you know exactly what you want to do with the text, because the Latin is very similar to English in how the sentences are set up, and the length of the words, and what have you. And so it's a good filler until you can create the text you actually want and replace the Latin with the text that you're after. So hopefully that makes sense. Now let me go ahead and delete all this. Let me show you some other concepts. Again, it's all very high level. Here's your pages. If you can't see those, you have to just turn on your pages here, F12 pages. And this currently has 1 page. Now we know that as a review, we can come back to this properties here and then here add additional pages. And again, it's basically your choice of the pages are going to be either stapled in the corner, for example. You can do 3 additional pages, type 3 in there, hit enter, and then suddenly you got 3 pages. 1, 2, 3 pages. Or you can do facing pages, where that's like a book. The book has a cover. You flip over the cover, and there's something on the opposite side, on the flip side of the cover, which would be page 2. And then the page 3 would be this one here. And you can see these by zooming out with the Alt and the zoom command here. You can see page 1, page 2, page 3. Well, page 2 is really the flip side of page 1. And this page 3 is really also acts as the back cover. So if you needed to have a back cover, you add another page, a 4th page. Enter, and then the 4th page. This would be the back cover, for example, the 4-page book, as an example. And I'll give you an example of how to do a layout when we talk about, different methods of creating portfolio pages in a future class. But this creates a multi-page facing page design, and if you uncheck the box, there are independent static pages. Okay, so under pages, you see pages, here 1, 2, 3, 4. And they all have little A's next to them. So on top of this paper, there's A, here and there. And what that means is that these are using what's called a master page. So master pages are a template. It's a technique that you can add to a layout to predetermine how the pages are going to lay out, how the design is going to be organized. And it can dictate where images are going to go. It could dictate where text is going to be applied. It can set up a style for your book. And you can have more than one page style. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't have to be just one style. It can be more than one style. But the master page is listed here. If I double click on it, it looks like a standard page. But a master page gets applied to any page that uses a master. So, for example, if we were to go into, let's say I grab a rectangle here, the M tool, and I want something to appear on every single page. On every single page, we're going to have like a footer. It's going to be the same size on every page, and it might have a page number on it. And so, for example, you grab a rectangle tool, you drag it out here, and then here you've got the stroke or the color of the line, and then you got the fill on the inside, the color that fills up this rectangle. The fill is currently transparent, and the stroke is black. But if I want, I can fill in this with one of these colors, or choose a little box here with the line through it, and that brings up the color wheel. And I can come through this color wheel and choose a color that I want for the bottom of this border here. And there it is. If I want, I could also select this object and here turn off the stroke, and that you do by making the weight 0. So right now there's a thin black line. If you make it bigger, you see it's a line like this. That's a stroke, a line that traces your shape. But if I make it 0, it becomes invisible. It's still there, it's invisible. But if I did that to my master page here, master page, it'll get applied to every single page layout. Here's page 1, here's page 2, here's page 3, here's page 4. And so they all have the same look and feel as the master. What you do in the master gets applied to all the pages. So if you fix the master once, it fixes all the pages instantaneously. For example, you might have 10 pages. Well, rather than fix this bar on 10 pages, you do it once on the master, and it trickles through the rest of the page layout. So if I come back to the master here, double click, the master is active, and if I made this bar, say half the size, then when I return to page 1, 2, 3, or 4, you'll see that they're half the size. And whatever's blue is the active page. And if you want proof, you can go to zoom and zoom out, and you can see they're all exactly the same. So that's pretty useful, using the master. The master pages are also useful for layouts. And let's talk about layouts and how they can work with layers. So here, under Windows, there's layers. Click on that. Here are your layers. And these layers work exactly like Photoshop. Exactly the same as Photoshop. With the exception that more than one thing, text, graphics, what have you, can be on the same layer. You can have many, many things on the same layer. But it's also nice to organize your file by what's the purpose of the layer it's going to be. You know, some layers are going to be maybe for images. Some layers are going to be for text, for example. Some might be just guidelines or what have you. So if you click here at the bottom, there's a little plus sign. That lets you add layers. So for example, if I made 2 more layers, and I want to change these layer names, I would double click on the layer name and I can change the name here. So for example, I'll use this one for text. Okay, so that's going to be my text layer. This one here, double click. Maybe that's for my images. And this one here I might use for my guidelines. Guidelines. And I don't want them to print. And so the first 2 layers, text and images, I want them to appear. I want them to show up. I want them to print. But this one, I don't want to print this. And so for this layer here, I'll just turn off print layer. Hit OK. And you see print layer is italicized. So whatever I put on this layer, it's not meant to be printed. And I can go back into my master here. And I can begin to do things like, for example, using lines to create, some type of design. Like I can draw a line from corner to corner, corner to corner. On this layer here, and all these objects are on that same layer. The line, this rectangle, the other line, they're all in this layer called guidelines because that was the original layer I started with. Yes, you can click on these objects and click and hold and drag them to another layer and they'll move to other layers if you want to move them around. But remember, guidelines isn't meant to print out. So if I go to these other layers, you'll see those guidelines show up here. But when I go to W for printout, there's you have it. They won't print out. Let's print out the bar at the bottom, but not this X here, for example. Maybe I was using that to determine where the center is because maybe I wasn't using the guidelines or the ruler, but let's say I did something like that. Well, what I want to do here is go to my layers here, and I want to move this rectangle at the bottom into a different layer, and I'll make another layer here. I'll call it graphics or something. And I'll move this rectangle. I'll just click and hold on it, drag it up into graphics. And graphics is a printing layer. So when you look at these pages here, they all have all the same look and feel as the master. But when you do a print preview, W, you see the bar is here. The bar shows up here because it's on a printable layer. And there's different rules and whatnot that govern how to use these guidelines. We'll get into strategies of how to lay out your pages in a future class, but important to note that you can place things on layers that don't print, but they do get sent into all the other page layouts. Now, you can have more than one page layout as well. I mean, you might have, you don't want the same layout and design for your entire presentation. So that can be boring and repetitive. So you might want to mix it up a bit. So for example, if I have these guidelines here, and I have a layout that has, again, I'm working on my master here. Double click on the master while I'm working. Let's say I just had 2 images here. I got a placeholder, and I put an image here, and then I selected it, and using Shift Control again, I moved it down to here, and maybe I resize it or something. This is not exactly in the middle because I've got a border here at the bottom, so it's not quite right. Now, but you can also put these placeholders in here as well. Yeah, I'm not sure why second placeholder is not showing up. Okay, there. Okay, I put these placeholders here for future text. Now, if I go to my page layouts, you see they all have the same places where pictures are going to be placed, or text or something. But let's say I didn't want that. So let's say make a new master, a new master page. So I right click on this and I can go new master, and it's going to be called B. So this is A, this would be B. I can give it a name, for example, if I need to give it a name. You know, it can be very specific, like design page A, or, you know, photographs, or, you know, whatever I need to do. But this is master B here. And maybe master B, I have a completely different layout. On this layout, I have maybe I have a center line. And maybe this has simply just you know, 4 pictures. You know, you got a picture here. Here. And then if I select both of those, Control C, Control V for copy, paste. Let's say I want this layout. Well, to add those to the other pages, because these are all using A, I simply right-click on the master page and then apply master pages to. And then here I can just write down the names of the numbers of the pages where that's going to get applied to. Let's say I want to apply to page 3. Page 3 is here. As soon as I do that, then you see here in the little icon, page 3 has placeholders for 4 pictures. So here's page 3, 4 pictures. So page 1 has 2 pictures on the right, 2 pictures on the right. Suddenly this is different. And this is different. And this goes back to page A. You can make as many of these as you like and apply them to your layouts. Or you can simply click and hold on one of these layouts here, one of these master pages, click and hold on it, and drop it off on top of the sheet you want to apply it to. So for example, I want it to apply to the last 2 pages. So this one already has one. I can apply to this one. And now they both have the same design layout B that I have from here. And then when you return to your pages, say this one, for example, or this one, for example, you drag and drop your pictures onto these frames. You know, you come in here and you choose a picture and you drop it in there. So they're meant to be placeholders. Then you have to decide, you know, is the box the wrong size, or does the picture need to be scaled up or down? If you can afford to do it. If I'd like, I can right click on here and do the fitting technique and fit the content proportionally. Or I can right click, fill the frame, the box, proportionally, so on and so forth. And then you can make some adjustments to line it up and whatnot. Again, these blue boxes won't appear, these guidelines will not appear, none of this information will appear, except for the final image. W gives you a little preview of what that looks like. So typically you want pictures, you want maybe a little title block, and you want them all to look the same on every single page. So you do a master page that sets up the size of the text, the fonts, the style of the page, and then you simply come into those pages and place images within these borders here that come from the master page. That's the concept. That's the idea behind it. This is W. That picture, we go back to our layers here. That picture is here under graphics, because that was the last selected layer. You see a little pin right there? That's the active layer. So whatever you do is going to be on that layer right there, because that indicates that's the current layer right there. This one here is blue. And so that image is going to be on that layer for graphics. And if it needs to be under images, and you move it up to images, and now it's in, and you see the border here is red, and the layer is red here. So they kind of let you color code the pictures as well, so you can know what layers they belong to by virtue of what color the borders are in. And these are in this red layer called images, and there's the image there. If I keep working, it'll add them to this layer, because that's the one with the pin. Whatever you collect last is the one with the pin. All right. So, and you can also obviously duplicate these. You can delete and duplicate these as well. So here I made a duplicate of it, and on the duplicate here, double click. I might want this to be gone, and I want this to be here because I intend to put text here or something. And then when you apply that to a sheet, for example, this sheet here, this last sheet has a large area here for text. So if I started a text box here, right on top of that, and then grab my Latin phrases. I can go back to my Latin page that I closed out of here. Give me a second here. So here's my Latin page. I can say give me 2 paragraphs, generate 2 paragraphs, copy 2 paragraphs, and then back in here, select that text and paste. And there are 2 paragraphs. And then when you add pictures, you can then come in here and place pictures, whatever the case may be. Maybe this one here, drop it in there. I don't have any selected, that's why that's not working. I'm going to just drag it into here. Another place. Drag it into here, click. And then you can quickly see, if you hit W, what this might look like printed out. You see everything looks nicely organized. Everything lines up. The top of this lines up with the top of that picture. These columns here are exactly the same sizes. That one is not, because I haven't done a good job of laying this out yet. But ideally, you want these to be consistent. You want these columns sizes to be the exact same size. And that's what you want to use the master page for. The master page makes sure that that kind of work is set up. You can go back to W, and you can see the skeleton behind it, the frame behind it that caused that page to look the way it does. Okay, so that's layers, and it's also the master pages. So be sure to use master pages because they're very, very helpful. And as I mentioned, my intention is to give you an idea what the commands do, but it's really up to you to figure out what they do precisely and to achieve the goals you're after in your designs. I will have another class where we'll focus on the design rules or principles behind how to lay out a nice page. There are some logic to how you do this, and I gave you a couple of links last week that talk about that, but I'll save that for a future class. But that's those master pages. Now, last thing I want to mention here is that and notice let's see, go back to here. Go back to my master page here, and I'll just get rid of these for the time being. Okay, so let me start another project. File new, printout, 11 by 17, landscape, only one page, hit OK. There's the page setup. Again, we want to make sure that the rulers are set up. So under view, you want to make sure that this does not say hide. It says rulers. Well, it says hide rulers when you have them visible, basically. This goes up to 102, which it cannot be inches. So that is a different unit setup. So you want to make sure you right click on that intersection. Go units there. And here what you want to do is, whether you're doing it on the master page or the individual page itself, whichever one. You also have some ways of organizing the page through looking at these tools here under layout. Pages adds and inserts pages. That's pretty easy. These two. But margins is another quick, useful one. So if I go to margins, for example, here, these are the margins here. And they let you line things up along the edge of the paper. Because typically, when you do text, for example, you don't want the text to run to the edge of the paper. You want to have at least a margin of some sort so text knows where to stop and start and doesn't go beyond that. So that's the margin that's really helpful for text. But here, you also have things like columns with numbers and gutters. And so this is a very quick way of organizing your page. So for example, let's say you want 4 columns. Okay, 4 columns. And then there's your columns. But here, the gutter is this gap between the columns, this area here. And you can come in here and make it exactly what you want. So 1/8 of an inch is 0.125, for example. That's 1/8 of an inch. You can see 1/8 of an inch up here. Or, wait a second, is that right? 1/8 of an inch? Let me check my calculator real quick. 1 divided by 8. 0.125, yep. When you go here to margins and columns, you can change this and adjust it. You know, you can have 6 columns, and this could be maybe 1/4 of an inch, for example. So 0.25. Hit enter, and there's your column spacing. And so then you can use this as a guide to place your frames or your colors here. And it's just a quick organizational tool. And again, none of this prints, right? This is W. None of this prints. Another way that you can do this is to here's under view, here's grids and guides. Here you can decide what to do with the guides and grids when you set them up. And for example, here they're locked, so you cannot adjust them, you can't move them, you can't delete them, and they're also, you can snap to them, and that's important. But also you can delete them all. You know, here, delete all guide grids, for example. That's another one. Or you can hide them. Here they're hidden, and here they're shown. They're not deleted, they're just hidden temporarily. And that's under view. And so if I did this and I wanted to cheat and adjust these over here, for example, and make the rest of these columns, then I could unlock them. Whoops, I did the ruler. Margins, let's say I go 6, 0.25 here. Guides and grids, and here it's unlock them. So I can grab these two and respace them, for example. Or obviously in this case, I probably want to just if I wanted fewer, I would do a lower number here and just respace them. They also have which one was it? I believe it was create guides, and this lets you do rows as well. So for example, I want to have 4 rows, and between each row another 1/4 of an inch. I can type that in as well, and I can hit OK. And then I got these boxes here, which I can use for just about anything. I can click here and place graphics exactly on these guides, but the guides aren't meant to be literal. They're just meant to give you like an overall organizational tool that's kind of behind the scenes that ensures that everything you put into the screen is the same, just follow the same standards. So for example, I can do a guide grid this big and do another one this big and another one this big. And maybe this goes across the bottom here. And then here I'll know that this one's off, so I can adjust it up. So on and so forth. So here what you have is a layout that uses the grid behind the scenes, but it doesn't have to be literal. You don't have to use each box literally. You can if you like, for example, for these here. And we'll get into how to space them and everything and make sure they're equal and everything, but in a future class. But they're meant to give you some kind of order behind your file. So when I place my graphics in here, oops, they land where they're supposed to, where I'm expecting them to land. And then you come in here, you start dropping pictures in here. And then using the techniques we talked about earlier, I can resize this picture, fitting it proportionally or fitting it frame. But what this does is, you can see the grid is sitting here underneath the drawings. You place all your images, your text, or what have you. And then when you hit W, what you have is a system in place that lines things up perfectly across the page, vertically and horizontally. And without that system, your files don't look quite as finished, as professional. And so this is another method of making sure that happens. And we'll get into this conversation about what kind of techniques you can use to make your presentation look better. But this is what we're gonna talk about in a future class. We're gonna discuss primarily how to use the grids, what kind of spacing works and doesn't work, and then what to put on the screen and where and how. But that's it. That's it for today. Does InDesign look pretty easy, or does it look complicated so far? What does everybody else think? I mean, I think the most important thing, take away concepts from today's class is to understand the principles of the master pages, how to set up master pages, and then how to apply the master pages to. I mean, I could have done this exact same layout with a master page, but you want to use master pages when you have more than one page. Because if you're just doing it for one page, then you can just simply create the guidelines yourselves and be done with it. There's no magic to this. You know, there's guides, there's rulers, there's margins and columns. You can create layouts using this tool pretty quickly, pretty effectively for a single page. Then it's just a matter of, you know, how to position what where and what looks good, you know, using graphic design standards. But if you have more than one page, if you have maybe 2 pages side by side, then that's when you're going to use master pages. You know, when you have more than one page and then you want to have a system in place to apply to more than one page. So you might have a portfolio. Well, you might have the first page, the 5th page, the 10th page be the same look and feel, same kind of layout and design. But you might have 3 or 4 different looks for each page. Because no one wants to look through a portfolio that is very redundant, that has the same pictures in the same exact locations on every single page. I mean, that is a very hard thing to look at. People like to be surprised when they're flipping through portfolio pages. And so it's important to understand that, you know, you do have access to master pages, right-clicking, and you can make as many as you like. And it's very easy to tweak them and modify them and apply them to the pages in your document. Because I imagine for the final assignment, you'll probably have 2, maybe 3 pages. So think about that and think about how you want to use the master page concept to make the work much easier. Now let me get rid of all this stuff. Actually, let me just start over. And oops, I made a mistake, and I wanted to be horizontal landscape instead of vertical. Now, you rarely have to start over in these documents. You rarely have to just close your file and restart the file if you believe you made a mistake. The tools are going to be somewhere on these menus, especially these pull-down menus. They're pretty deep. These menus on the side are just shortened versions of what's available up here in the pull-down menus. If you really want to get in depth into the weeds, to the details, you look at the pull-down menus for anything you want to do. But these are shortcuts. So, for example, if I wanted a layout that was landscape, not vertical, then I would simply come here. Landscape, not vertical. If I want 2 pages here, and they were not facing, page 1, page 2, and I want to be facing, then just click there. And there are ways to bind these together. So we'll talk about that as well. Combining this page with this page, for example, to have like a 2-page spread, like design boards. Have one design board here and one to the right of this. We'll talk about that as well. Not important at the moment. But it's important that you explore the tool. Has anyone decided to use InDesign for their design portfolio project, or using other programs? Design profile project, not portfolio project. Design profile next week. What was everyone using for your layout, your design? No, it's not required to be in InDesign. Some people are using PowerPoint. Okay. Let me hear from every team. Google Slides, PowerPoint. Okay. All right. Well, I'll leave you with that today. Again, our next class is the design firm profile project. So I want to give you enough time to work on that today. So jump back to that. I'm looking forward to seeing what your projects look like. Gather as much information as you can, and then also practice your presentation. You shouldn't be presenting it for the first time next week. You should have presented it to yourselves between each other at some point before next week's class. So this is not a night before project. This is meant to, you're being graded on not only what the presentation looks like, but also your delivery. And so if you're stumbling around, you're not sure what to talk about, well, then you haven't practiced. So this is worth 250 points. So make sure you put your best foot forward. And again, each team member will be presenting certain slides. So make sure you have in advance who is playing what role and when. So it's equally distributed amongst the team members. So I'll leave you to that. Any other questions for me?
Yeah, I had a question. So I've been attempting to get in contact with my partner's design firm for a week now. They said that they wanted to talk this past weekend, but they never responded to me, I guess, because they said that they were gonna call me. And then they never did. So I sent them a second email today, but if we don't hear anything from them, what should we do?
Well, as I talked to one of your classmates earlier, then just add more information to some of the other sections. Maybe focus on why this company is different than another company. What are their strengths, for example? What are they known for example? You could add more slides to any other section you want if you don't have enough data for some of the technology questions. If you can't find it on their website because they haven't posted information about their process or their software they use, or you haven't learned anything about them via a phone call, then make the other sections stronger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. Just make them stronger. That's fine. Now, obviously, if that's the case, don't include those questions as being empty in the presentation, right? Just leave them out. Leave them out altogether, and just strengthen the other sections. Maybe instead of 3 pages for one section, you might have 5 pages or something, or maybe have more pages dealing with their portfolio and be ready to speak about the companies and what makes them unique and and also I'm also looking for your opinions. What do you find interesting about them? What do you like about them? So just be prepared to do that. And if you don't have all the answers, you don't have all the answers. That's fine. You won't be graded any less. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Well, I'll let you guys continue working, and I will look forward to seeing your work next week. Okay? Take care.